Father Sheridan, Dr. Kempton, members of the Board of Trustees, distinguished faculty and staff, fellow members of the class of 2017, and the families and friends who supported you to this happy afternoon, it's a joy to share this moment with you and an honor to address you and to become an honorary alumnus of the Franciscan University of Steubenville. I must say, obtaining this doctorate has been a fair bit easier than the last one. But this one means much more to me. To stand here and receive this honor today is of much greater ultimate importance because Franciscans' appreciation for the work I've done in recent years defending unpopular truths is a signal of your willingness to stand on those same principles and to continue forming generations of students in these truths. Thank you for this honor, and thank you for the work that you do day in and day out. Of course, this university has been in the business of defending unpopular truths for many years. And you, fellow graduates, are well prepared to lend your voice and dedicate your lives to the cause of the truth. I've had the great pleasure of speaking on this campus every year for the past 4 years. Each visit has been a delight, speaking to students who actually want to learn, who want to make a difference. Franciscan University has prepared you well, and the world needs what you have received. So as we celebrate your accomplishments over the past years as students, we must also think about what comes next. What is God asking you to do? I've worked for the past 12 years as, among other things, an editor. And when people want to become writers, the first piece of advice they should receive is to write about what you know. I think the same thing is true for speaking, to speak about what you know. So in the time we have together this afternoon, I want to speak about something I know quite intimately, my own calling in life. And I hope that by sharing a few thoughts on my own calling, it'll be helpful as you discern your callings. If we have a calling in life, it's because someone has called us. God calls each of us by name to a specific path of holiness and service to others. And yet we live in a society that largely avoids thinking seriously about vocation. We live in a society of rampant individualism and relativism, where man is the measure of all things. We'll hear people speak of human rights, but rarely of human goods or human nature or nature's author. We'll hear people appeal to natural rights, but rarely to natural law or the natural lawgiver. So the first thing to say about vocation is that it's intimately connected with truth, both metaphysical and moral truth. And we have it on good authority that each of us has a calling in imitation of the Master who gave his life bearing witness to the truth. And we will face this challenge everywhere our lives take us, in government service, in the marketplace, within our families, in service to the church. And we must be prepared to defend truth as never before. Let me say a word about how I got here. As an undergraduate, I was planning on teaching high school after graduation, coaching football and lacrosse, and helping out with my school's music program. But my undergraduate years were when President Bush issued his executive order on embryonic stem cells, when the attacks of September 11th took place, when we went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and when the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts redefined marriage, making Massachusetts the first state in America to do so. All of these events got me thinking more seriously about the importance of politics and of political morality in particular. What did I think about the morality of embryo-destructive research? About the justice of war and peace? About the consequences of redefining marriage? And then how should Christians participate in these discussions? This time at college was also the first time I had ever met evangelicals or daily mass attending Catholics. Indeed, it was the first time I had met any Christians deeply committed to the faith. And so at Princeton University, of all places, I started to think seriously as a Christian. And I came to see that there's no conflict between faith and reason. I came to understand more deeply the reasons for the hope I have. But I also came to see just how misguided secular liberal policies were on the most urgent and important questions. How much damage in terms of human brokenness those policies cause. I saw that to love my neighbor required me to help defend the truth in terms that my secular classmates could engage. That the knowledge I had acquired in thinking through those questions wasn't just for me. It wasn't just so I could be secure in my opinions, puffed up knowing that I'm right and they're wrong. But it was to be shared. And it was to be shared precisely because it's the truth that sets us free and makes us flourish. This was what God was calling me to do then and there. He may be calling some of you to do the same. Franciscan is rightly famous for its top-notch nursing program, Patrick Lee's world-class bioethics center. In a certain sense, all of you will be engaged in nursing a wounded culture as you graduate from this place today. You will encounter the walking wounded and will need to minister to them as what Pope Francis has referred to as the field hospital of the church. In my case, this meant not pursuing a career teaching high school, but living out a vocation in the public square. As my college graduation approached, I turned down a job offer from Teach for America, and I took a position as a research assistant at the Witherspoon Institute, providing research assistance to 2 professors of political theory. This was for me a crash course in political philosophy and natural law theory. I then worked for 2 years as an editor at the journal First Things in New York City. There I learned how to write and how to edit, and also how to think in terms of political theology. This then prepared me for a PhD program in a discipline, political science, that I had never taken a class in as an undergraduate. It prepared me to do the work that I've been doing for the past 5 years at the Heritage Foundation, trying to find ways to reach modern, secular audiences with arguments for the truth about life and marriage and religious liberty and social justice. I could have never have planned this for myself. It was simply a matter of taking one step at a time. God will sometimes give us a 5 or a 10 or a 20-year plan. But frequently, he just tells us about our next step. And then we have to be faithful in taking it. So the question is, what is the next step God's calling you to take? And are you willing to take it? Now, why does any of this intellectual work matter in the first place? Why did you devote the last 4 or so years of your lives to higher education? Universities were the creation of the church. Christians believed that all knowledge came from God. And so using both faith and reason, we could seek out unified knowledge of the truth. In the Middle Ages, Christians established some of today's most storied institutions, Oxford and Cambridge, the universities of Paris and Salamanca and Bologna, all to fulfill Christ's command that we love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind. Precisely because God is logos, because God is reason itself, it is good for man to develop his mind. As a being made in the image and likeness of God, man has reason to seek out the truths about God, about man, and about nature, truths that are embedded in creation, a creation that should be understood as the outgrowth of God's designs. And in the universities established by the church, we see the flowering of theology and philosophy, science and medicine, human rights and legal theory, economics and ethics, literature and music and art. All of these disciplines were developed and deployed at the service of the truth about God and man and nature. As free and rational beings, and that's what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God, we have a calling to develop our minds, to embrace the best of Athens and Jerusalem, philosophy and theology. When faced with secularist ideologies, we have the responsibility to show the world the harmony of faith and reason. When faced with modern relativism, we have the obligation to propose with the Apostle Paul the more excellent way. And this only intensifies as you graduate today and enter a world that is simultaneously hungry for and resistant to your message. Franciscan has given you the tools to continue learning for a lifetime and to share that knowledge with your neighbors, desperately in need in the truth, even when they don't realize it. I want to illustrate this with lessons learned from 3 of my teachers. Hadley Arcus was my first unofficial teacher of political philosophy. A Jewish professor at Amherst College, Hadley was convinced by the natural law of many of the moral truths that many of us here defend. And it was the church's witness to these truths that led him a number of years later to be baptized into the body of Christ. Some argue that the church should soften her stance on the so-called controversial issues, that in order to be evangelists, we have to be seeker-friendly. They're wrong. While we shouldn't be bombastic or imprudent, it's precisely our countercultural witness to what St. Paul called the more excellent way that will bring people to Christ. By witnessing to the natural law, we can make our claims about the supernatural law, the law of grace, all the more believable. For all law ultimately comes from the same divine source. In a culture that is so confused about morality, with so many people hurting from false teachings, helping people see the truth is one way of loving our neighbors. Robbie George was my next teacher. Here's what I learned. Bad philosophy has to be answered by good philosophy. Bad science needs to be responded to with good science. This is true with the science of embryology, the social science of marriage, and the psychology of gender identity. We cannot allow the other side to pit these debates as ones of faith against reason, that force a choice between backward superstition and enlightened science. As C.S. Lewis once taught, good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason because bad philosophy needs to be answered. This takes work. Since our adversaries control all of the principal institutions of our culture, we have to work twice as hard as they do. We have to understand their arguments better than they do, so we can then explain at the level of reason where they've gone wrong. Even if your professional vocation will never bring you anywhere near these debates, you need to continue learning, the learning that took place here at Franciscan, and prepare yourselves for the discussions at the office water cooler or at the Little League games, being ready to help your neighbor understand the reasons for the truth. But you can't stop there. And here's where my 3rd teacher comes in, Father Richard John Newhouse. Father Newhouse taught me that while we have to respond to bad reason with good reason, we also have to build on that reason with revelation. That while nature and natural law are foundational, grace builds on and perfects nature and makes us perfect. And Christ came to make us perfect. Newhouse's life was one of witnessing to the truth of Christ, to what he called the high adventure of Christian discipleship. For Newhouse, friendship with Jesus at the end of the day was the only thing that mattered. The only way to persevere in living out the truth of the natural law is to know and love the natural lawgiver. The only way to find the courage and the strength and the hope to fulfill our vocation is to rely on the grace of the one who calls us to that vocation. You leave Franciscan today and enter a society that, in many ways, is fundamentally opposed to what you have learned here. Do not allow your spiritual life to decline once you leave this supportive environment. Make the effort now as you start your careers and families and graduate educations to commit to a life of prayer, sacrament, and service. Father Newhouse was a leader in the civil rights movement. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. He protested the Vietnam War. And he was an early recruit to the pro-life movement. He saw it as the logical extension of all of his prior activism. And he hoped that his liberal friends would see it the same way. But they didn't. They caved and they abandoned him. and a life which was set on a trajectory of liberal accolades and the applause of elites took a new path. Abandonment by former friends, denial of honors and prestige, scorn and ridicule, all of this may very well happen to many of you because of your witness to the truth about the dignity of the human person and the human body. But none of this is new. The 2,000-year story of the church's cultural and intellectual growth is a story of challenges answered. For the early church, there were debates about who God is and who is God. In response, the church developed the wonderfully rich reflections of Trinitarian theology and Christology. In a sense, we have the early heresies to thank for this accomplishment. Arius's errors gave us Athanasius's refinements on Christology. Nestorius's blunders gave us Cyril's insights. 1,000 years later, with the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, the church saw renewed debates about salvation. And while the rending of Western Christianity is an unspeakable tragedy, it left the church with a much richer theology of justification, ecclesiology, and soteriology. Today's debates are not primarily about the nature of God or the nature of the church. They're about the nature of man. John Paul II taught that the crisis of the 20th century was a crisis of faulty humanism. Secular thinkers thought that by diminishing God, they would be elevating man. Instead, by diminishing God, they debased man. The result was world wars, totalitarian regimes, Auschwitz, and the Gulag. Our debates today simply extend this faulty anthropology to a new domain. So whether it be debates about abortion or assisted suicide, same-sex marriage or gender identity, they all challenge three truths right on the first pages of the Bible. That we are made in the image and likeness of God, that we are created male and female, and that male and female are created for each other. We now need to defend these truths using every discipline that can reveal the truth about man. In addition to John Paul's theology of the body, we need a philosophy of the body, and a psychology of the body, and a sociology of the body. We need you. We need philosophers and theologians, psychiatrists and psychologists, biologists and sociologists, and artists and saints. Because our defense of the truth can never be merely an intellectual exercise. Take it from no less of an intellectual giant than Benedict XVI. Pope Benedict is rightly famous for having written profound works of theology and having participated in debates with top European intellectuals. Yet he's also rightly famous for saying that it's not the arguments of the intellectuals that win converts, but it's the lives of the saints and the beauty of the artists. As Benedict once put it, Christianity is not an intellectual system, a collection of dogmas or moralism. Christianity is instead an encounter, a love story. This love story, with its beauty and holiness, starts in the home, the domestic church. If you're graduating from Franciscan, chances are you didn't do it on your own. You had help along the way. Someone was there to teach you to walk and talk, to read and to write. Someone was there to help you to love Jesus, to take any interest at all in the type of education and formation that Franciscan provides. Someone helped you with all of life's ups and downs. Be sure to thank your mom and dad, your grandma and grandpa. And in the midst of all of your excitement today, don't forget that tomorrow is Mother's Day. I once did that. Your parents and grandparents took care of you as a child, and you should start now preparing to take care of them. Too many of us millennials think it's the government's job to care for our aging parents and grandparents. But when Scripture speaks of honoring our mother and our father, it doesn't mean only behaving ourselves when we're kids. It also means caring for our parents as they age. Whenever possible, inviting them into our homes rather than sending them to a nursing home. Viewing them as our responsibility not just social securities. Sadly, this is another point on which our culture is eroding. One of the most alarming developments of the past few years has been the reopening of the debate about assisted suicide. Alarming, but not entirely surprising. We live in the most medically advanced era of all of human history, and yet it's only now that we think physician-assisted suicide is a necessity of human dignity. This isn't because it's medically necessary. It never has been and it never will be. It's because caring for the elderly can be inconvenient. And we're a selfish, individualistic, and materialistic people. We've come to view the elderly and the disabled as burdens. And as a result, they're coming to view themselves this way. Patrick Lee makes a solid argument against assisted suicide, and that's an important thing to do. Indeed, it's an indispensable thing to do. But our best way of fighting the scourge of assisted suicide is to love and cherish and care for the elderly. It's to do what the Little Sisters of the Poor do when they're not forced into suing the federal government. Showing the world what a true death with dignity looks like. This is part of the love story that Pope Benedict is talking about. Unconditional love to the end. Many of you found your place in that love story and the adventure of Christianity while here at Franciscan. This community helped you to grow in your faith. So as you graduate today, find ways to continue that community. Stick together. The world outside this campus is not a friendly place, especially to people who speak the truth. But it needs you to speak the truth. It needs what Steubenville has given you, and you will need each other. Bear witness to the truth by living out the truth. Go to Mass, go to confession, join a parish, volunteer to teach Sunday school, get involved in your parish's parochial school. Be generous in responding to God's call in your life. Join a religious community, get married, stay married, be a faithful spouse, knowing that adultery and divorce are always dangers that must be guarded against. Be generous in welcoming children, and be a devoted mother and father. Bear one another's burdens, persevere through adversity, and let the family you create, the children you raise, and the parents you care for be our best long-term defense of life and marriage. Let the love you create and sustain, the holiness and beauty of your life, be what attracts others to Christ. Class of 2017, congratulations on all of your achievements these past 4 years, and best wishes in what lies ahead. If you remember nothing else that I said today, and chances are you will remember nothing else I said today, remember this. Important as academic and professional success may be, God doesn't ask you to be successful according to worldly standards. He asks you to be faithful. The only success of ultimate importance is holiness. The only real tragedy in life is not to have been a saint. Thank you.